Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. I just wanted to show myself on video to prove that I am here. I'm not a bot. I'm not impersonating Cam Cullen. I'm the actual person. So I will now make myself disappear so we can get back to the content. Um, but again, thanks for joining. This is the second in our webinar series on building a defensible architecture. In the first one, we talked a little bit about legacy devices in the OT space and how those can be protected and basically hidden from discovery by hackers who are trying to get in, which really is kind of one of the first major attack vectors in the kill chain, which is basically reconnaissance. So finding out that there are vulnerabilities in your network that can be exploited. What we're going to talk about now is the second biggest vector in that initial kill chain, which has caused many attacks in the marketplace today, which is around defending your credentials, basically going kind of beyond phishing. And the problem that we have in the market today compared to the problem of reconnaissance is that hackers really aren't hacking in anymore. They're essentially logging in. So the ability today to steal credentials has been the cause of as high as 86% of successful hacks. This is from the Verizon data breach report. There are varying statistics. You'll see numbers anywhere from 25 to 86% here as the source of that. But the fact is, regardless of what the number is, this is a major problem. In fact, Joe Baxter, who is BlastWave system architect, wrote a blog last year about check the password on the board because often in the OT environment there's a lot of default passwords, there's a lot of password sharing, and there's been a bunch of reports even that normal IT people sit there and write their passwords down. Again, numbers again anywhere from 25% all the way up to over almost 40%. People who write down their passwords. They also use password managers, which have been hacked recently and are also now a new vulnerability vector. But the bottom line is this is a major issue for companies. And one of the blogs we wrote in this basically talked about the marketplace that exists around passwords. An IT team spends a lot of time responding to phishing. There's a lot of money spent on phishing training by companies like KnowBe4, who's the source for this. They have packages, and they'll actually conduct their own internal phishing training and testing to see if their users are clicking on phishing emails. You can see it costs quite a lot to discover and mitigate a single phishing emails. So people have started trying to implement MFA. So MFA is good. Microsoft says that accounts are 99.9% less likely to be compromised. Notice they don't say they're not going to be compromised, but they're less likely. And that, CrowdStrike basically is emphasizing that, saying that 75% of breaches involve credentials, so just like the number we gave before. So this is a growing problem. The issue, even with most MFA solutions out there, is there are attack vectors that can result in your MFA being compromised. MFA fatigue or bombing is very common, which basically that the hackers just keep bombing your cell phone, typically, which is what you see, or sometimes your email, until you click on the yes, that's me, either in frustration or annoyance, and then they can log in based on your password. We'll talk a little bit more about this later, but there's also voice phishing, where they call impersonating a support person using intelligence and AI, and they get you to give them what they need to get into your account. SIM swapping, session hijacking. Session hijacking is a real problem when it comes to privilege access management and RDP type solutions, where you can hijack someone's MFA challenge in a browser by basically having control or keystroking their browser and having that. So not even MFA, generically speaking, is good. In fact, for those that saw the blog we did this week, we basically analyzed the Jaguar Land Rover attack. And for those that haven't seen that, it started with a voice phishing attack. So they used a phishing vector to get someone's credentials, and that was the beginning of the entire attack for them. So it is becoming obvious that we need to get away from using passwords and even some forms of MFA. And one of the reasons why we believe at BlastWave that this is becoming a major problem going forward is what I call the Joshua fallacy. And for those who are fans of war games, will appreciate this, but it's really the misguided belief that cybersecurity defenders can win the game against an attacker armed with state-of-the-art generative AI. And just as in war games, when they want to play that game, the only way to win the AI game is not to play. In fact, some statistics on AI when it comes to cyber attacks is that 4,151% increase in malicious emails since ChatGPT introduced. So people are using ChatGPT to drastically ramp up the volume of their emails using AI. And their AI-composed emails are far more effective. You can see here the same report, SlashNext, 52% click-through rate for an AI-composed phishing link versus a human-composed one, which is 12%. That's significant. And why are these emails better? Well, because you use better language. You're grammatically perfect. You know, we've all gotten emails attempting to phish us that had spelling errors or clearly were written by someone who didn't speak the language that they were trying to phish you in. They use something like Google Translate as part of that. So you can tell the language quality. Often with these AI systems, they'll actually do research on you. So they will find out your Facebook interest and what you've posted on, and they'll touch on something you did on LinkedIn. I mean, how many emails do we all get now saying, hey, I saw your post on LinkedIn on blah, or that your company's doing this, and you know, we really think you should be good, blah, blah, blah. So you'll see these more effective messages that look like they're reasonable because people can have the AI do all of that homework for them. And it's all automated, so they can just the sheer volume of attacks is amazing versus what you used to be able to do. And the last point that I just made around multiple language, you could do this both with emails, but you can also do this with the voice phishing as well. So they can maintain those nuances in some of these real-time systems. So the goal that we want to have here is to block the initial vectors, which are basically where they're sending that email package, they're trying to get you to click on a link, they're trying to get you to give your credentials or click on an email so that they can install malware. So the question that BlastWave asked ourselves is, what if? What if that wasn't an issue for operational technology environments and critical infrastructure? What if we go passwordless, but not just go passwordless, but make sure that the remote access that you are using cannot be easily exploited both by hackers as well as AI systems. And what we want to do is make sure that users in OT can work the way that they work today without security in the way. One of the biggest lessons that Joe Baxter, again, he used to do NERC SIP auditing for the energy department, is that if you make it hard to get into something, users will find a way around the security and they will limit the security and cause it to fail. So we want to make sure that it's not an impediment. So we want to eliminate phishing with BlastWave by making it easy to use. And what I'm going to do now is walk you through how remote access works. So I've talked to you a little bit about why the market, I think most people understand that. But now I want to actually show you exactly how BlastWave makes this easy. the first thing you do in BlastWave is I want to add a user to the network. What I'm going to talk about today is the BlastWave kind of internal process. We do have the ability to integrate with SSO and other things like FIDO keys, so you can keep your existing authentication. But what I want to talk about is how we believe we can totally prevent phishing by using this technology, which really, as I get to it, I'll talk about how you would actually have to do to hack this process. The first step in a user creation process is to receive an invite to the system. So you cannot access a BlastWave system without being invited into that. And that's done by this screen essentially in our what we call our orchestrator, where you either basically copy a registration URL to the clipboard, and I can, for example, paste it in Slack. So this is not something that someone can send you an email and say, hey, reset your password, because there is no password involved here. This URL, which can be delivered to the user in a very secure manner, gets sent that and they get invited into the network. And this is an example of what that URL that a person would get in Slack. And when they click on that, what it does is it invites their mobile device as an authentication mechanism in our system. And I'll talk about how that works going forward. But now the user, they have an account set up, and we have bound their identity to a specific device that they have, using in this case their mobile phone. So now that user on their laptop downloads the Blast Shield client, and they are presented with this screen when they launch the client. It says, what authentication method do you want to choose? And as I mentioned, we do support SSO. We also support hardware-based authentication with FIDO2 keys, which is often used in deployments as a backup admin account, so that even if all devices and accounts are lost, you still have this key so you can get in the system and pick it back up the speed. But what we're going to talk about today is this mobile application. And when you click on that mobile application authentication, what the system does is it puts up a QR code. And what it wants you to do is pull out your mobile phone, launch the Authenticator app. And now that Authenticator app has already been basically seeded with a public key for the orchestrator that we're talking to. And when I scan that QR code, it's creating a dynamic session key saying, okay, this person is actually talking to me. I'm using this to create a unique individual session key so that I can authenticate you to the network. So you're not authenticated yet, but it says I'm actually the right person who I am. So now let's start the authentication process. So I scan that QR code. And what happens is your phone will pop up this screen saying, okay, yep, that is a valid QR code. Now on your client, select the proper network that you want to connect to. So then you select basically the Blast Shield network you want to connect to, your OT environment. If you have multiple sites or multiple locations, typically it's still one network. But if you're a maintenance contractor, for example, you may have multiple networks that you want to connect to. So you select your network in the screen, and then the phone makes you authenticate. So that's typically with biometrics. It's Face ID. For Apple, it could be your thumbprint on an Android or an Apple. So you're now doing biometrics. So once you successfully authenticate with your biometrics, you are now connected to the network. So what's interesting about that whole process is you have a laptop or your PC that has the client. You've got your mobile device, which has an authenticator app, and you have that QR code, which is a human in the loop. So let's keep those in mind, because we're going to talk later about what you would have to do to actually break into that kind of three-legged authentication process. But now you are a user and you're connected in. I'm not going to go through the process, but if I was actually an administrator to the network, I would actually click on this Launch Orchestrator button, and I would have to authenticate a second time to prove that I am who I am. So I would have to go through again the authentication process so So if someone steals a user's account and that person is the administrator, they have to go through the same hacking process twice to get into the administrator account. So it's not even a one-touch login for an admin as well. Okay, now we have a user and they have access to the network. What we're going to now do is say, what group does that user belong in? And a user can belong to multiples. Maybe they're a conference attendee, they're servers, they want to go to jump hosts. So you basically decide which group of users they are, which will then be used to connect them to the devices that they want to be able to connect to. But I also am watching everything that that user has done. And one of the things you'll see here, so this is the user logs, and you can see not only that I'm online, but in this case, the IP that I logged in from and the location that I logged in. So if, for example, you think, and again, we'll talk about how this isn't really possible, if you think a user has been compromised and you see that they're logging in from a place that you don't want them to, you could actually say, nope, that's bad. Let me kick them off the network because they're, maybe they've been kidnapped and they're being forced to log in remotely. So you can stop that and see where people are coming from a login perspective. We also now, as I mentioned, you're able to configure what the user groups are in. The other thing you can do, which is actually extremely unique in the space, and this is to combat all the confusion around firewall rules. And I talked about this last week in terms of how we do cloaking, and you can only allow to access the things that you want to in a very flat network. You can ask the system, what are the rules that apply to this user's connection? So what are do they have things that they're allowed to connect to? Do they have things they're allowed to connect out to from the OT network? So we have this little button over here called View Matching Policy. So when you're in the administrator, I can see exactly what things or which rules apply to a user. So if something isn't working, I can troubleshoot that in real time by basically saying what policies are active for that particular user's connection. But I do want to pop back a little bit to that discussion we had before about hacking into the system. So to break into a BlastWave network, what is required is for a user to first compromise the laptop and get root access. And you need that root access in the laptop because you need to be able to take control of the key that is being generated from the VPN client and the certificate that is used as part of this QR code that we're talking about right here. You have to be able to get access to the public key and private key that are being used to exchange with the orchestrator. Secondly, you have to get root access, essentially jailbreak the mobile device, because you need to get access to the mobile device key, which, by the way, it's not just root access. You actually have to get into the private key store. So in an Apple phone, for example, to an iPhone, the device keys that are used for Apple Pay are kept in a separate hardware and OS than the actual OS itself. So you have to break into that private key store, not even the general root access, to get access to that, because you need to steal the private key that was generated when you accepted the invitation on the BlastWave client itself. You also have to be able to make the user scan that QR code. So even if I have the laptop and the device and the mobile device, the system is going to pop up that QR code that the mobile device has to scan. So even if I'm a remote and I've hacked your laptop, I've hacked your mobile device, I still need to make you scan that QR code to make the session continue. So it's impossible unless you have a human in the loop and you have a gun to their head and you're making them scan that to get through this. So what I just wanted to highlight, this is not something that AI can break into from a user access perspective. We also have a further capability beyond the simple client, something that we call basically this kind of secure by design. So this kind of walks through that. If you're interested in these slides and want to kind of walk through this process, again, feel free to reach out. My email is cam, at blastwave.com, and I can send you the slides. And if you want a demo of this, we can certainly arrange that. The other solution that we have, which is very commonly used in operational technology networks, is a RDP remote desktop solution, which is called Blast Access. Now, Blast Access allows you to say that this user is only going to have access to a certain system in the network, and they have to use remote desktop. So this is commonly used in many remote access scenarios to limit how many people or what you are allowed to do and the systems you're allowed to talk to, enforcing your access to this one system. Now, what we do different than this is because this is a browser-based solution, we don't typically trust it very much. So we still force you to log in with the Blast Shield client. So you still log in with the client, so it's not completely kind of client or basically web browser based. But once you launch that client, then one of the policies that you're allowed to implement are to connect to the Blast Access server, which is running on a desktop, running RDP to that remote user. So now we've given that user remote access to that. You can conduct any operation to the OT network using the RDP. In this case, probably that's a SCADA system or some HMI that's controlling systems on the OT network. So we've given you both a truly interactive remote access solution as well as a limited interactive solution through Blast Access. And then at the end of the day, what that results in from a policy perspective that I talked about, based upon the user groups that you're in, it will determine which devices or device groups that you're allowed to talk to. So we can make sure that users that are coming in are only allowed to talk to the systems that they need to do their job. So it's a least privileged access scenario. And this is really easy to use. So obviously I walked you through a lot of steps in that, but literally to log in, it takes 3 seconds to come in. You don't have to remember passwords. You just scan the QR code, you pop your finger on, and it all works. So it's very easy to use. It's super simple to deploy, to add users into the network. And it really does help prevent cyber attacks. So I did want to keep this under 30 minutes. We're now at 23. So are there any questions that anyone has on anything that we talked about in the webinar, or any other further questions? If you do, put them in the chat. I will again, my email is cam, C-A-M, at blastwave.com. We have a number of blogs that we're doing this. The first webinar in the series, as I mentioned, was on legacy devices. The next one that we will have is on network segmentation. So if you're interested in that topic, I'm going to do the same thing and walk you through how we segment the networks with software defined versus being a hardware oriented solution, and walk you through kind of how that would fit in the network as well. Okay, it looks like we don't have any questions. So again, thank you for joining. We want to kind of make these informative and useful. So if you have any further follow-up, please let us know. Thank you.